big ball. Going for the big shot, and he hits it.
That's batted into the air, intercepted, and the Bears are going to win it.
So if you're tracking the Bears, there's appear to be a ton of different, I guess, quote unquote, changes and debates that are taking place about what this team should do moving forward. Obviously, there was a veteran D tackle that's a two-time Super Bowl champ that was cut today that people are now saying the Bears need to go pick him up. Welcome into the Halas Beat, brought to you by the Bear Report. Usayd, Koshul, Steve, Letizia here. Check us out on Twitter at Usayd, Koshul, at CFC Bears. I mean, Steve, I don't know about you, but this whole debate of like, hey, the Bears should pick up this guy, and oh, so-and-so, and, this person needs to start, this player has to start over this guy because we've seen so-and-so make plays. It's getting sort of like out of hand, I guess, in my opinion, because we know what the roster is and we know what this team is capable of doing at this point.
Yeah, I mean, you know how Bears Twitter works. Anytime any player who has any sort of name recognition gets released, it's the Bears need to sign this guy, or the Bears need to trade for this guy, if there's a trade rumor going around. Truth is, the roster, like you said, the roster is pretty much set. They can do a few tweaks here. Maybe they do end up signing or claiming Kalen Saunders. It's not going to really change much either way, whether if they do or they don't. But it's just fun. Bears Twitter. It's I think unlike any other Bears or any other NFL fandom, I don't want to have it any other way. It's fun to just argue about random stuff on online, and it's even more fun when the Bears are 6-3 and looking pretty good. So it is what it is.
Yeah, and again, to your point, one of the things to kind of keep in mind here with this team is the fact that it's like they've sort of, Kalen Saunders would be a nice sort of midseason addition, but there's only so much money to go around, and now he's in a position to where it's like, all right, you take him, or do you basically hope that he falls to you on the waiver wire, which is unlikely, or if he clears waivers and is a free agent, well then, how do you go about that? Because you don't really have a ton of money to sort of spend here. And it's like they made their additions with guys like Grady Jarrett and Dayo Odeyingbo, which obviously, both those haven't panned out. But the purpose of this week's show, guys, is not to discuss, I guess, defensive linemen. There's a certain rookie on this team that is quietly becoming a sort of householdish name. And what I mean by that is, Luther Burden's a guy that a lot of people expected to start, but then he missed time in the spring, misses time in training camp. In comes Ben Johnson basically saying, hey, well, if you're not out there, then it is sort of a hindrance to your team, which to me, I don't know if you remember that comment specifically, but I feel like a lot of Bears fans took that comment out of context. And so now we're in a situation to where, for the Bears, ultimately, I guess the question at this point in the year is, does or should Luther Burden have a bigger role moving into week 11 here?
I mean, you don't draft a player 39th overall, I believe it was, top 40, especially a wide receiver, and don't with no intention of playing him, or with the intention of him being your fourth or fifth wide receiver and sixth or seventh target all year. It was only a matter of time before he gets more playing time, and I think that time is now. I took a look at the EPA per target for each kind of receiver for the Bears. It's Colson Loveland at 0.62 EPA per target, leading the Bears. Luther Burden's next at 0.39. Then Odunze, 0.21. DJ Moore, 0.14. Colcom at 0.11. And Zacchaeus at negative 0.15. So I think there's a clear kind of way to kind of get him into the lineup there. It does seem like the Bears offense flows a little bit better, when they go through Loveland and Burden and Odunze. It just makes sense when you have a young guy. At this point, Zacchaeus, I still think he's a good player despite the drops. I think he could be still a serviceable player for you, but he should be that fourth wide receiver with Burden kind of taking and jumping him in that rotation. And I think look at him this last week against the Giants. He had that really nice route late in the game on that last final drive where he sold his route vertically and then just kind of snapped it off for a big gain, and then fought for extra yards to get them into a range where they could set up the Caleb Williams touchdown run. It just makes a lot of sense to get him more involved in the offense. And I think there's a clear way to do that, with Zacchaeus kind of taking a slight step back, maybe even DJ Moore taking a potential, slight step back, because the offense has just looked so much better going through those young guys than it has some of these veterans. Now, some of that also might just be, is because we're scheming up touches. When Burden, he doesn't have a huge sample size. So the EPA per target, is maybe a little bit of a misleading stat because it is such a small sample size. When he does get in the game, they usually give him like a schemed up target or stuff like that. But he's proven that he's at least, maybe not proven, but he's earned the right to take a larger role into this offense. And I don't know if that's going to happen, necessarily right now this week, but over the next, what do you have, 9 games left? I hope we do see a bigger role for Luther Burden.
Yeah, I want to, talk about the quote-unquote, implications of this, because some people are going to say, well, you shouldn't bring Zacchaeus back. I know you had a tweet on Sundays during this past week's game, Sunday's game against the Giants, about, hey, it's time to, end the Zacchaeus experiment. Now, to me, so the other part of this whole thing is this, that first of all, Burden playing at a high level like he's been, given the time that he missed in the offseason, is certainly a major positive. But I think the other part of this whole thing is that it's like they've only got 5 or 6 wide receivers on the roster. I mean, Janae Walker's not playing a significant role. One of those receivers is Devin Duvernay, and he at this point is only a special teams returner. So the question is, it's like, well, who's your wide receiver for? Because the Bears have kind of shown this season with their personnel groupings, well, we're not really going to flex some of these tight ends out wide. Like, we're not going to have a Colson Loveland, Cole Kmet, right? You guys are both in the slot, 2x2 formation or a 3x1, whatever it is, right? Like, it's more so just, I think what it is that who's going to be your wide receiver for? And to me, that guy should still be Zacchaeus, because, yeah, he's only here on a 1-year deal. But again, I think that, when we look at where this team is in terms of the development, you need to have reliable, essentially, a veteran presence in that receiver room, even though you've got Moore and Odunze, that you can kind of still rely on as a legitimate option. Because to me, it's easy to just sit there and say, well, move on from Zacchaeus, draft a wide receiver with one of your 5 or 6 day 3 picks that you have in 2026. The problem with that approach, I think, is the fact that with the needs that this team has, I don't think it's smart to spend a pick on a receiver, especially because there's more pressing needs that have to be addressed. But also Zacchaeus is, I think, a solid rotational player.
Yeah, I still think Oz is a fine rotational player. The point I was trying to make during the game is I just don't think he should be getting the target share he's getting right now. He's getting a pretty hefty target share by the Bears, and that should be starting to spread out between Burden and Odunze and Loveland a little bit more. He's perfect as that wide receiver 4, but right now he's really operating as the wide receiver 3. So I think Burden should jump him kind of in the pecking order a little bit. He's still a really nice player to have. If Burden or Odunze or DJ Moore goes down with an injury, that's a perfect guy to step up and fill a role in the short term. Who's going to be productive. He usually does catch the ball. I know that in this past game he had the 3 drops, but he usually is pretty reliable with his hands. He's always in the right spot. He understands how to get open for his zone. He's still a solid player. But yeah, going forward, Burden and Loveland and Odunze should all be kind of eating into his target share a little bit this year. In terms of bringing him back, next year, I'm perfectly fine with that. He's on a relatively cheap deal. You can get him back and still have him as that wide receiver 4. I think DJ Moore has a much better chance of being moved this offseason than Zacchaeus does, just because of his contract and everything like that. But that's a conversation for another day. But I think I listed out the EPA stats. Don't even worry about that. Just if you just watch the games, it just looks so much smoother when Burden's targeted. or Loveland's targeted or Dunze's targeted than it does when Cole Kmet and Zacchaeus and even DJ Moore is targeted. The offense should really be running through Loveland, Burden, and Dunze. It just makes a lot of sense. The stats support it. The eye test supports it. Those guys are the future, and I think it's time to kind of start getting those guys, make those guys the focal point of our offense.
And again, you talked about EPA. Another major stat here is this. For those of you guys that may follow Marcus Mosher on Twitter, maybe you've gone ahead and heard of him. He every Tuesday morning releases a most big plays per game through week 10. The Bears are number one on that list and have been number one on that list pretty much all year. So, when we say big play, we mean a rush play that's 10 plus yards and then a receiving play or a quote unquote pass play that is 20 plus yards. The Bears have 44 rushes of 10 or more yards and then 34 passes of 20 plus yards. So the Bears are sitting there comfortably at, 78 big plays. The next closest, believe it or not, is the Buffalo Bills with 68, the Baltimore Ravens with 65, and then the Seattle Seahawks and LA Rams with 64, and then the Chiefs with 62. So, when we talk about hey, these are the guys that this offense needs to sort of run through. I mean, the other big thing is that Luther's also sort of shown to be a really good yards after the catch player. And that to me is so important. Number one, just because that's sort of the way that, the league is continuing to trend and has been trending for the last 7 to 8-ish years. The second big thing I also look at when it comes to Luther's game is that if you remember watching Luther at Mizzou, and this goes back to some of his high school days as well, he was never really the type of receiver who would be running, a go route 60 yards down the field, and it was, I'm going to, score a 60-yard touchdown. That's not his game. His game was naturally so, hey, I'm going to run a 15-yard crosser or a 15-yard out route, for example, and then you're going to hit me in stride as a quarterback, and I'm going to take this 15-yard crosser and turn it into a 25 or 30-yard gain. And so to me, when we talk about how his role is going to continue to evolve, I mean, I remember when they drafted him, I said, he's not really your Jameson Williams in this offense, because I think the Jameson Williams in this offense was more so DJ Moore and is more so DJ Moore. To me, he's more of your classic, Amon-Ra St. Brown / Tim Patrick type player, to where you do move him around, but he does a lot of his damage in that 8 to that zone of 8 to 15 yards between the line of scrimmage.
Yeah, that's kind of why he was drafted. I mean, when they first drafted him and they asked Ben Johnson, what are your thoughts on Luther Burden? The first thing he said was, have you seen him after the catch? The guy's a monster, or something like that. And I think that's something that the Bears offense could really use more of. DJ Moore is pretty good after the catch, but Odunze really isn't, great after the catch. Zacchaeus isn't, really that great after the catch. So I think they could use a guy like that who's going to get you some of those tough yards after the catch. I mean, just going back to that play that I was just referencing earlier at the end of the game where he caught the ball and I was like, oh, that's a good play. He's probably going to go down there. But then he fought for 7-8 more yards, which was really awesome to see. But talking a little bit more about just kind of the wide receiver room in general, I do think one thing they are missing is not, if we're going to be talking about kind of, next year, is I do think they are kind of missing that speed deep threat to kind of stretch the field. Dunze, all these guys can win deep. Dunze can win deep more. Even Luther Burden can win deep, but I wouldn't say that's really, their strength of what they do. They're more middle of the field, they're more intermediate routes, get open, separation on double move, stuff like that. So I think getting I know, like you said, the Bears don't really have the luxury to draft another wide receiver or spend money on another wide receiver. But if you could find someone somewhere, even, a late round pick or undrafted free agent, just to bring a little bit more speed and deep threat ability to this offense, I think that could really open up things even more. I don't know exactly how they're going to get there, but in terms of the wide receiver rotation, like I said before, I think it's Loveland, Burden, Odunze, and Moore. And then anything else you get from those wide receivers is just, just gravy.
That's something we're going to have to see. I want to spend a couple minutes here talking about the Canadian Eagle because it seems like there's this sort of roller coaster like trajectory that is related to Theo Benedict. And some of this, I think, just comes down to the fact that the guy's an undrafted free agent, basically having to play one of the most important positions on offense. Some of this comes down to the fact that, the Bears have basically had to like change some of this stuff on offense as a result of Theo Benedict's lack of experience and some of his deficiencies. But, Theo Benedict's a guy that I look at and I kind of say, you should ride with him for the rest of the year because you don't really have another option. Because let's just face it. I mean, if Ozzy Trapilo was ready to play that left tackle spot, the Bears probably spend a ton of time in training camp working him solely at left tackle. And I know some people are like, well, it's mid-November. Why are you going back to July and August? I think because, we're at the point in the season now where some of those decisions that were made in July and August are now fully coming to fruition, sitting here in mid-November with December a couple weeks away. And for the Bears, Theo Benedict's a guy that this team seems to be pretty high on. Obviously, I think some of the stuff that people say about him is a little bit just being critical and nitpicky because it's like, oh, well, I saw 2 Twitter clips. He ends up getting beat by, these 2 edge rushers on these 2 specific plays. And so that, is forcing the Bears to keep Cole Kmet in and go max protection or 6-man protection. I still think that if you are a team that's looking to address that position, then, which the Bears will be in 2026, Theo Benedict has to not necessarily even be one of your options as a starter, but he can be a pretty capable backup.
And that's the thing; he's a backup playing as a starter right now, just kind of out of necessity. And he's playing like a backup. So I've been pretty critical of Theo Benedict only because he is a starter. I mean, just because you didn't expect him to be a starter this year doesn't mean you can kind of grade him on a curve. He is a starter. You have to kind of look at him as a starter, and he hasn't really played at a starter's level. I do think the Bears are doing a lot to kind of hide him in the past game, and he's still getting beat, and he still is one of the lowest graded left tackles, at least as a pass blocker in the NFL. He's much better as a run blocker. He's doing some good things in the run game, which is really good to see. But really, ultimately, I think he's a guard, kind of playing tackle right now. He doesn't have long arms. He's got good athleticism. He doesn't have a great anchor. There's a lot that the Bears, obviously, like you said, the Bears need to address the position in 2026. Like you said, and then like you said, I think he is going to be the starter, the rest of the year, whether you like it or not. They just got to continue to kind of hide him and do things to kind of mitigate some of the current concerns that he does have. In terms of Ozzy Trapilo, I think that ship has sailed. The Bears tried him at left tackle in the preseason or in training camp, and by all accounts, it wasn't very good. And I think they're just resigned to the fact that he's a right tackle now. So I don't see him taking over Theo Benedict's job, even though I would like to see it. I think he has more talent than Benedict. He's bigger than Benedict. He is longer than Benedict. I think it's worth a shot and see what he can do. But I just don't see that happening. I think once, in this offseason, I talked a little about this before. I didn't like the idea of moving Darnell Wright to left tackle, but I think that is ultimately, and I still don't like it, but I think that is ultimately what they're going to end up doing this offseason is move Darnell Wright to left tackle and then have Trapilo at right tackle. And we'll see how that plays out. Like I said, I don't necessarily agree with that because I think you have a really good right tackle on Darnell Wright. The way I look at it is don't mess with that. You have to just keep him a right tackle and let him keep blossoming. But I do think that's ultimately what they do. But like I said, he's doing some good things in the run game. I don't want to harp on him too much. The run game has been better. He is, run blocking a lot better. I don't know if Braxton Jones is going to be given another shot. I doubt it. But if he was, part of the reason that he was replaced is because he just wasn't healthy. So, now we're, a month and a half removed from Braxton Jones. Has he gotten healthier? Maybe you give him another chance, but ultimately, I think you are right. Theo Benedict's your left tackle. kind of whether you like it or not for the next 9 weeks, and let's see how that goes. There's still the possibility that he continues to improve as well. He's still a young player who doesn't have a lot of reps under his belt. Let him play. Hopefully he improves. But I think that's a position they look at in 2026.
Just saying, I would bet that if the NFL draft were today, either the Utah tackles are high on the Bears board. But again, that's all stuff that we'll talk about. This is a really good NFC conference to me. This is one of those NFC conferences where it's like, right now, if you look at some of the top teams and we look at the way that this conference has played out, it is one of the more loaded conferences that we've seen in the last couple of years. And that's specifically because there isn't necessarily that team that is, head and shoulders, I guess, better than the rest, right? And a lot of it is because of quarterbacks. Like you look at Philly, Seattle, Detroit, and Tampa Bay. Well, their quarterbacks, Jalen Hurts, Sam Darnold, Jared Goff, Baker Mayfield. 5 is the Rams with Matt Stafford. 6, you got the Bears with Caleb Williams. 7 and 8, you got Jordan Love, Brock Purdy. And then 9, you got Bryce Young. 10, you have J.J. McCarthy. If you look at the 10 teams right now, obviously, if we look at the top 10 of the NFC, there's probably only 3-ish legit Super Bowl contenders based on where we're at right now. That could obviously change moving forward. And we look at where Caleb Williams is compared to a Jalen Hurts or Jared Goff or a Baker Mayfield or a Matt Stafford. I would say this right now. If you're talking solely just the rosters that some of these teams have, if you're to take Caleb and you were to put him on any of these other rosters, I think Caleb's having an MVP type year. Like, he hasn't necessarily blown some people out of the water per se around the league the way that Drake May has, because Kirk Heimstreit's on the Thursday Night Football broadcast along with Al Michaels talking about how, Drake May's putting together an MVP level season. But I think with Caleb, he's a really good starter for 99% of these teams in the NFC.
Yeah, I'm going to push back on that a little bit just because I think, you mentioned, if you put Caleb Williams on other teams, he's having an MVP-like season. I think the Bears' offense, is pretty talented. Rome Odunze, DJ Moore, Colson Loveland, Cole Gomet, Luther Burden, all those pretty good weapons, and maybe not the top of the league, but pretty good. They have a pretty good offensive line, minus left tackle, but the rest of the offensive line is pretty good. They got one of the best play callers in football with Ben Johnson. So I think moving Caleb Williams to a different team, I don't know how. There are certainly some teams that have better weapons and a better offensive line than that, but I don't know by how much they are better than that. I think the difference between the Bears and some of these other teams is more on the defensive side of the ball. The Bears defense can't compete with a lot of these other teams. I do think Caleb Williams is having a great year in terms of where we stack him in the NFC in terms of the quarterbacks. I think this is a 2-part question, really. It's kind of where do you stack him right now, and where do you stack him, long term? Because if we're talking right now, I think he's probably in that conversation of between maybe like 4th and 8th. I would say right now, in the NFC, on any given day, you could be even higher than that. But he's had some good games, but these last two games have been fantastic. I'm not taking anything away from them, but it's also against the Giants and the Bengals, not exactly the greatest teams in the world. So I'm trying to take my Bears, rose, navy and orange colored glasses off, because I do tend to be a little biased towards the Bears. So I'm trying to approach this from a way where I'm like, okay, I want to put myself in in the shoes of someone who's not a Bears fan, which is sometimes hard to do. So I think that's kind of where he would be right now, with the chance of being way higher than that. If he continues to play like he has the last 2 weeks, then we're talking potentially best quarterback in the NFC, or at least top 3. But even with that being said, even with everything we've seen right now, if the conversation shifted to, you have to draft a quarterback from the NFC to lead your franchise for the next 15 years, then I think he goes first overall in that draft, because he's shown so much potential. He has the, he's clearly improving. He's so much better than he was last year. Even throughout this season, he's better. He's been better the last 3 weeks than he was in week 1. So the signs are really bright. I just hesitate to put him in that upper echelon of the NFC, because you got, I think Sam Darnold, the sample size with Sam Darnold now is big enough where I could say last year was not a fluke. Like, he really has kind of turned a corner, and he's one of the top quarterbacks in the NFC. Jalen Hurts, for all his struggles, he still has won a Super Bowl. It's tough to put him Williams above him. Matt Stafford is playing probably some of the best football of his career right now. He's a potential MVP candidate. Dak Prescott and Jared Goff, those guys have put up big stats in the NFL. Even Baker Mayfield's pretty good. And then you got Jaden Daniels in there. Jordan Love is in that conversation as well. I'm not a big Jordan Love fan, but I think he deserves to be in that conversation, currently. But I think, I don't want to seem like I'm too negative on Caleb Williams. I still think, obviously the future is really, really bright. I just want to see it a little bit more. Maybe it's just the Bears fan in me where I'm hesitant to crown him because I've been hurt so many times before. But like I said, it's kind of two different conversations. Right now, I'd put him, fourth, fifth, sixth in the NFC. For the future, I'd draft him first overall.
Okay, so to me, here's my thoughts on this. And again, you're not necessarily wrong. I think that if you take the Caleb Williams of the last 2 weeks and put him on any team in the NFC, the results are, to me, vastly improved because of the defense. Okay, because of, like you said, the defense that these other teams have. To me, where this conversation comes down to is that does Caleb Williams legitimately move the needle for the Bears? Or an even better question would be, is Caleb Williams legitimately moving the needle for the Bears in the right direction? I would argue at this point, yes. And the reason that I say that is because we talk about the sort of season he's had through the last 9 games. And really the first half of the season, when we look at it, he was playing, I'm not going to sit here and say he was playing safe, quote unquote, but he was playing pretty good football. He wasn't turning the ball over. He was making pretty good decisions. He went ahead and outside of week 7 and 8, looked like a quarterback that was sort of the catalyst for this offense, and a true catalyst in terms of making sure that he was able to go ahead and really help the offense take the next step. So we saw the stacking of the consistency, which when we go back and we look at some of these other quarterbacks here, like, let's just be honest, right? So I'm going to take Sam Darnold out of the equation because Sam Darnold was up and down for so long. It doesn't help that he got drafted by the Jets. That, I think, is a deciding factor, which I should mention. I love Sam Darnold coming out of USC, and had the Bears not taken Trubisky in 17, Sam Darnold would have been my guy in 18, because to me, he was on a sort of Phillip Rivers-like trajectory. But you look at some of these other quarterbacks, like I remember, things being a struggle for Jalen Hurts that first year. I look at Jared Goff in this offense and I say, well, Goff sort of struggled to stack good days as well sometimes in this offense, especially the first half of the year in 2021 in Detroit, and then really at different points in 22. And then I think we also look at where Baker Mayfield was at, another guy that was up and down a ton before he finally found his mojo in Tampa Bay. Well, to me, right, Caleb's on a sort of similar trajectory in the sense that we've seen the ups, we've seen the downs. If I were to rank him as a quarterback, though, in the NFC right now, based on what we've seen the last 2 years, I would say he's probably at number 7 or 8 for me. And that's not me being like quote unquote negative on Caleb. I just think that, there's the Saints game to me was a big killer, because the Saints game for me was, dude, you're playing a 1-5 team. That should have been your true breakout game. Yes, you rebounded from that game nicely, but also the Ravens game, when they needed you to step up, you didn't necessarily step up, so that's why I'm pushing him down the board. But I think if he has a solid performance in that Saints game, he's going from 7 or 8 to possibly 5 or 6 in the conference.
I thought you were going to be higher on him. I thought I was going to be the low man, so that's interesting. But I think with Caleb, he has proven that he can win you games. He proved that. I mean, this Giants game was, I think, the best game of his career. Not only did he go out, the Bears win that game with the fourth quarter comeback, but he won in spite of everything that was happening around him. With all the, I think I charted 6 drops. Some people said 7 or 8. I think it was, other people said 5. I think it was about 6 drops that that the Bears had, and big drops too, down the field. There were a few short ones, but some, down the field as well. So he won that game despite what was happening around him, which I think is something that some of these other quarterbacks on the list can't always do. That being said, with Caleb, kind of like you alluded to, it's the high variance that prevents him from being in the upper echelon right now, because on any given week, he could be the best quarterback in the NFC on any given week, but he also could be, the 10th, quarterback the next week, because he just doesn't have that consistency just yet. I think overall it's heading in the right direction, and we might have this conversation again in a month, and, he could be higher, he could be even lower. We don't know, but overall I do think he is trending in the right direction. But it's definitely an interesting conversation because the NFC doesn't have a Josh Allen, it doesn't have a Lamar Jackson, Pat Mahomes, like the AFC does. It's the ceiling on the NFC isn't really as high. Matt Stafford, I think, is the best quarterback in the NFC right now, but he's also 40 years old. So, how much longer is that going to last? Jared Goff's older, Jalen Hurts, who knows what's happening with the Eagles, because that offense looks broken for the most part. I think a lot of that is on the play caller, to be honest, but Hurts certainly isn't helping either. So it'll be interesting to kind of I hope we revisit this in like a month, so we kind of see how he stacks up. But if he continues to play these next month the way he did the last 2 weeks, then yeah, we could be talking about even higher. And if he goes back to the Saints game, the Ravens game play style, then we could be talking about even lower. So but overall, heading in the right direction.
So let me just clarify my comment about him being like whatever 7th or 8th in the NFC. I do believe that the potential for him is to be much, much, much higher than that. I think, you start to talk about pretty soon here, if he gets that sort of big signature win, right? And what I mean by the big signature win is you go into Minnesota this Sunday, let's just say you knock off Minnesota and sort of get revenge for week 1. Then what you do is you come back home and you win the game against the Steelers. Now you're in a situation where I think against 2 really good defenses, Caleb Williams has put this team on his back and has gone ahead and has been the reason that this team is winning games, which, again, the latter part of it he's been. But the question is, can you do it against 2 really good defenses? If you do that, then all of a sudden the narrative about Caleb Williams starts to change to, hey, the Bears are really cooking with something here. Because right now, that narrative is, I guess, brewing, right? It's brewing. People see it. Not everyone sees it. Nationally, you obviously, I think, who was it? Cam Newton, who went on to ESPN, was like, well, Caleb's they haven't really beaten anyone, which there's partial truth to Cam's argument, but I think the other part of this whole thing is also the fact that it's like, if they can go ahead and he can have a next basically big 3 weeks, then we're in a situation to where it's like the narratives start to change nationally, and Caleb Williams essentially bursts onto the scene here, especially because he's been trending in the right direction. But again, like a lot of people, and I know I'm probably in the minority with this, I'm still searching for him to have like that one big signature win against a pretty solid team.
I think it's a really good point. It's not being a hater or anything to say that the Bears really haven't beat anyone. The team, all of our wins have come against lesser opponents. But I think it's also fair to say that just because the Bears haven't beaten a good team doesn't mean they can't beat a good team. I think that some of I see Packer fans and Vikings fans and Lions fans always saying the Bears haven't beat anyone. But yeah, that's kind of true. But I think we can beat those teams in the higher echelon of the NFC. Obviously, they have to prove that to us. But yeah, for the rest of the year, I mean, the Bears don't really have a weak defense on their schedule for the entire rest of the year. I mean, the worst team they play is the Browns, but the Browns' defense is actually pretty good. It's their offense that makes them an easier win. If he gets through this gauntlet and is still showing signs of progress or even winning a lot of these games, then I think it's going to be hard to keep him out of the conversation of top 3-4 quarterback in the NFC.
I should also preface this by saying the Bears have won 6 games, while This is no disrespect to Caleb Williams. This isn't me saying the Bears suck either, because if you read my latest piece on Bear Report, one of the things I talked about was nobody really cares how the Bears are winning games. Like the last time this team was 3 games above 500 was 1,845 days ago. So it's been that long legitimately, okay, since 2020 essentially. And I chat GPT'd that, by the way. But the big thing here is this though, is I do want to mention, right, like your 6 wins for this team have come against teams that if the draft were to be today are picking in the top 12. So while we're enjoying these wins and Caleb's playing real good, I think that, it goes back to me saying, like, we're still looking for him to have like that one major signature win to show like Caleb Williams has fully arrived. Like right now he's arriving, but Caleb Williams has fully arrived. That's essentially more so what I'm alluding to. But we're going to get out of this place. Make sure you guys are following us on Twitter at Usayd Koshul, at CFC Bears. All right, that's Steve's handle. Make sure you guys are checking the Halas Beat account on Twitter as well, at Halas Beat. Like, comment, subscribe to the YouTube channel, guys. If you are listening to us on a podcasting platform, give us a 5-star rating and review. If you guys want us to discuss anything, then go ahead and comment below on YouTube, tweet at one of us on Twitter, or just tweet at the Halas Beat account. Obviously, we'll go ahead and discuss whatever it is you guys want to on the show. Until then, ladies and gentlemen, and until next week, bear down. Enjoy the Bears Vikings this Sunday.